Never wanted trouble. I moved into my home with one simple goal: mind my business, run my private farm, and enjoy some peace and quiet. Then Karen happened. She wasn't just an HOA president. She was a dictator in a pantsuit. A clipboard-wielding tyrant obsessed with power, control, and enforcing rules that didn't even exist. At first, it was small things: a passive-aggressive note about my mailbox, a citation for a single leaf on my driveway. Then she discovered my farm. And that's when she declared war. She tried everything to take me down: fake violations, bogus complaints, even trespassing in the middle of the night. But what Karen didn't realize: I don't like being pushed around. And if she wanted a fight, I was more than happy to give her one. What followed was a battle of absurdity, petty revenge, and the ultimate downfall of the most unhinged HOA president in history. This is the story of how I defeated an HOA tyrant. One bowtie-wearing rooster at a time. It was a perfect morning. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting a golden glow across my quiet, peaceful neighborhood. Birds chirped. A gentle breeze rustled the trees. My coffee was just the right temperature. Hot, but not scalding. Life was good. Then came the sharp click-clack of high heels on pavement, shattering the tranquility like a brick through a window. Karen had arrived. Karen wasn't just a homeowner in the neighborhood. She was the homeowner. The self-appointed queen of suburban order. The HOA president. The wielder of bylaws and harbinger of passive-aggressive letters. And she had spotted something. I saw it the moment she zeroed in on my property. The slight squint, the purse of her lips, the way she clutched her ever-present clipboard like a battle axe. She adjusted her pearl necklace, flicked an imaginary speck of dust from her iron-to-perfection blouse, and stormed toward my driveway with the righteous fury of a suburban avenger. I took a sip of my coffee, watching her approach. "Good morning, Karen," I said, making sure to sound just chipper enough to be annoying. She ignored my greeting, her eyes scanning my front yard like a general surveying the battlefield. Then she pointed at the ground. "There's a leaf on your driveway." I looked down. Sure enough, a single, lonely leaf sat near my car tire. "And," she gasped, as if I had just admitted to clubbing baby seals for sport. "And it's a violation of HOA cleanliness standards." I almost laughed. "Karen, it's one leaf. It probably fell 5 minutes ago." "Rules are rules," she huffed, whipping out her notepad. "I'll be issuing a citation." This was not the first time Karen had tried to regulate my existence. Over the past few months, she had fined me for absurd infractions, including having a mailbox that was allegedly 1 inch too tall, owning a garden gnome that she deemed aesthetic pollution, parking my truck in my own driveway because it was an eyesore. I took a deep breath. "Karen, do you ever take a day off from being?" I gestured vaguely. "This?" Her eyes narrowed. "I take my duties as HOA president very seriously." "I'm sure you do," I muttered. Karen made a note in her clipboard. "I expect that leaf to be removed immediately. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to issue a fine." She turned on her heel and marched away, her shoes clicking against the pavement like a countdown to the apocalypse. I stared after her, shaking my head. This woman needed a hobby. But I had no idea that the leaf incident was only the beginning. A few days later, she found her true reason to declare war. I owned a private farm just beyond the neighborhood. A modest piece of land where I raised a few animals, grew vegetables, and generally minded my own business. It had existed long before the HOA ever came into power, which meant it wasn't under their jurisdiction. Karen, however, had other ideas. One evening, just as I was finishing up some work on the property, I saw her standing at the edge of my farm, arms crossed, a look of pure disapproval etched into her face. I sighed. "Here we go." She tapped her foot impatiently. "We need to talk." I wiped the dirt from my hands. "What is it now, Karen?" "This," she gestured broadly at my farm, "is unacceptable." I blinked. "You mean my farm?" "Yes," she sniffed. "It disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. It's rustic." I stared at her. "Karen, this farm has been here for years. Before the HOA. Before you. Well, now the HOA exists, and it's my responsibility to maintain standards." I folded my arms. "Karen, this farm is not part of the HOA." She scoffed. "That's ridiculous. It's adjacent to the neighborhood, which means it affects property values." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Property values?" "Yes. We have rules," she said, flipping through her clipboard dramatically. "Your chickens don't fit the approved aesthetic guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, my chickens are not HOA members." That's beside the point, she snapped. The smell, the noise, it's all disruptive. I've had complaints. I had to bite back a laugh. Complaints from who? Karen hesitated. Well, I certainly find it disruptive. Ah, of course. She straightened her posture. I demand access to inspect the property. I chuckled. That's cute. No. Karen's mouth fell open like a malfunctioning ventriloquist dummy. Excuse me? I repeated slower this time. No. This is private property. You don't have any authority here. She turned red. I am the HOA president. I smiled. And I am the owner of this farm. There was a beat of silence. I could see the gears turning in her head, desperately searching for some imaginary rule to back her up. Finally, she straightened her blouse, huffed, and declared, You will be hearing from the HOA about this. I tipped my hat, looking forward to it. She stormed off, muttering under her breath. I knew right then that this wasn't over. No, Karen had declared war. And I was more than ready to fight back. I knew Karen would come back with a vengeance, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. The very next morning, I found a bright yellow HOA violation notice taped to my mailbox. Notice of violation. Your property has been found in direct violation of HOA aesthetic standards. Your agricultural activities do not align with the community's uniform appearance. Immediate corrective action is required. I read it twice, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She was really trying to ban my farm. I sighed and took the notice inside, tossing it onto the growing pile of Karen-related nonsense. I had no intention of correcting anything, especially not because some HOA tyrant with a superiority complex demanded it. But Karen wasn't done. That afternoon, she showed up again, this time armed with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and a man who looked like he deeply regretted his life choices. Karen, I greeted, crossing my arms. What a surprise. She ignored my sarcasm. I've brought the HOA compliance officer for an official inspection. The poor compliance officer, let's call him Greg, looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He gave me a tired nod, then turned to Karen. Actually, I don't think the HOA has jurisdiction over. Karen cut him off. We'll discuss that later, Greg. I smirked. Nice try, Karen. But this is private property. You're not inspecting anything. Karen scoffed, shoving her clipboard into my face. According to HOA guidelines, I gently pushed the clipboard away. Again, not part of the HOA. Your rules don't apply here. Greg cleared his throat. Yeah, technically speaking, HOA regulations don't extend beyond the neighborhood's boundaries, so. Karen's eyes twitched. Greg sighed. Yeah, shut up. He shut up. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Karen pressed on, undeterred. Regardless, your property still affects the neighborhood, which means the HOA has every right to ensure it remains up to standard. Up to whose standard? Yours. She flipped through her clipboard, searching for a justification. Your barn. What about it? It's too rustic. I snorted. Karen, it's a barn. It's supposed to be rustic. And your animals, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken, are a nuisance. I raised an eyebrow. A nuisance? Yes. The noises, the smells, Right on cue, my rooster let out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo. Karen flinched as if she had just been personally insulted. That right there. Unacceptable. I smirked. What do you want me to do? Give him a wristwatch so he crows at a more convenient time. Greg stifled a chuckle. Karen shot him a death glare. This is no laughing matter, she snapped. Your animals are disturbing the peace. At that moment, my goat Bruce wandered over, casually munching on some hay. He looked at Karen. Karen looked at him. A silent battle of wills commenced. Bruce won. Karen let out a strangled noise of frustration. If you don't bring this farm up to community standards, I will have no choice but to issue a formal complaint with the HOA board. I shrugged. Knock yourself out. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She turned on her heel and stomped away, Greg trailing awkwardly behind her. I knew she wouldn't give up. Karen never gave up. Sure enough, the real storm was just beginning. Karen's ridiculous campaign of terror. Over the next week, Karen went on a full-blown power trip. First, I started receiving daily violation notices, each one more absurd than the last. Violation notice. Your fence does not match the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Violation notice. Your rooster crows at unacceptable hours. Violation notice. Your barn has country vibes that clash with HOA-approved suburban themes. At one point, She even tried to claim that my tractor was an unauthorized vehicle. Then things got even weirder. I woke up one morning to find Karen standing at the edge of my property, measuring my grass with a ruler. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee as she squatted down, meticulously inspecting every blade. Finally, she stood up, scowling. "This grass is 0.5 inches too tall." I blinked. "Are you serious?" She jabbed her clipboard toward me. "Trim it." Immediately. I took another sip of coffee. "Nah." Karen looked like she was about to explode. "You cannot refuse to comply with HOA standards." I grinned. "Pretty sure I just did." She let out an angry huff and stormed off. But she wasn't done. The fake complaints begin. When she realized she couldn't bully me into submission, Karen upped the ante. One morning, I received a notice claiming that my goat had been seen trespassing in the neighborhood, which was hilarious because Bruce had been in his pen the entire time. Then another complaint. Formal HOA complaint. Multiple neighbors have reported disruptive farm odors affecting their quality of life. Immediate action required. Which was also hilarious, considering that my farm was half an acre away from the nearest house. She even tried to claim that my chicken coop was an illegal structure. I responded by sending her a formal letter, written in my finest legalese. "Dear HOA President Karen, please provide the specific legal statute under which chickens are considered unlawful residents. If they are required to submit HOA membership fees, please clarify how they may do so. Best regards, the chickens." Karen did not appreciate that. Karen's desperation peaks. At this point, the neighborhood was fully invested in our battle. Some residents were cheering her on, convinced that she was protecting the community from the horrors of rural intrusion. Others, however, were 100% on my side. Tom, my next-door neighbor, whispered to me one day, "Last year, she fined me because my garden hose was the wrong color." Another neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, admitted, "She once threatened to ban pumpkin decorations because they weren't seasonally appropriate." Karen's insanity was finally coming into the spotlight. But she wasn't done yet. One evening, I caught her trying to sneak onto my property. I was locking up my barn when I spotted a silhouette lurking near the fence. It was Karen, with a flashlight. I flicked on my floodlight, illuminating her like a raccoon caught in a garbage can. She gasped and stumbled backward. "I was just inspecting." I folded my arms. "Karen, are you trespassing?" She turned red. "No, I was simply verifying some violations." I smirked. "On my property?" She swallowed. I'll be filing a formal report about this incident." I shook my head, watching as she scurried away like a cartoon villain. That's when I knew. Karen was losing control, and I was about to deliver the final blow. I had put up with Karen's nonsense for weeks. The fake violations, the ridiculous complaints, the trespassing attempt. It was all so over the top that I half expected her to start hiring a private investigator to stalk my farm animals. But here's the thing about me. I don't like being bullied. And if Karen wanted a fight, I'd give her one. Only I wasn't going to scream, argue, or play her game. No. That's what she wanted. Instead, I decided to take a much more entertaining approach. It was time for some good, old-fashioned, passive-aggressive retaliation. The Great Karen Compliance Project. The first order of business? Strict and exaggerated compliance with Karen's absurd demands. Remember when she complained that my rooster was too loud? I fixed that. The next morning, I strolled into town and bought my rooster, Cluck Norris, a fancy little bow tie and a tiny cowboy hat. Then, I snapped a picture and sent it in response to her violation notice. "Dear HOA President Karen, thank you for your concern regarding Cluck Norris. To maintain compliance with the HOA's vague and unsubstantiated aesthetic rules, I have formally dressed my rooster in an approved, HOA-friendly outfit. Please let me know if the hat color is acceptable or if he needs to submit a formal request for an outfit change. Regards, Cluck Norris and property owner." Karen did not respond, but she did glare at me every time she saw me outside after that. Weaponizing HOA rules against Karen. Karen had spent the last few months making my life miserable with ridiculous made-up rules. So, I decided to fight fire with fire. I started studying the HOA handbook, and I mean really studying it. Within a few days, I had uncovered some very interesting violations on Karen's own property. Her front door color? Not listed as an HOA-approved shade. Her flower bed? Contained unapproved plant species. Her mailbox? 1 inch too tall, ironically the same thing she had fined me for. Naturally, I did what any good, law-abiding neighbor would do. I reported every single one of them. A week later, Karen stormed up to my property, waving an official HOA violation notice. "Did you file complaints against my house?" she screeched. I put on my best innocent face. "Oh, Karen, I was just ensuring that all HOA rules are followed. I assumed you'd appreciate my commitment to neighborhood integrity." She was seething. "You're being petty," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean like when you fined me over a single leaf on my driveway?" Karen turned red. "That was different." "How?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Checkmate. The HOA meeting showdown. Karen was fuming now. I had successfully turned her own HOA nonsense against her, and she had no way to retaliate without exposing her hypocrisy. So, she did what all power-hungry HOA Karens do when they start losing. She tried to get me banned from the next HOA meeting. She sent out a mass email to the neighborhood, claiming that I had been harassing the HOA board with unfounded complaints, which was hilarious, considering that all of my complaints were based on her own rules. Unfortunately for Karen, the email backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying support, it exposed her pettiness to the entire community. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, half the neighborhood had already heard about her nonsense war against my farm, and they were not amused. When I arrived at the meeting, I expected a tense, Karen-led inquisition. Instead, I walked into an absolute disaster for Karen. One of the older board members, Mr. Reynolds, cleared his throat. "We need to discuss some concerns regarding the HOA leadership." Karen froze. "Concerns? About what?" Mr. Reynolds flipped through a folder. "We've received multiple complaints about, well, you, Karen." I tried not to smirk. Another board member, Mrs. Dawson, adjusted her glasses. "You've been issuing citations for violations that don't exist, fining homeowners over trivial matters, and even trespassing on private property." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was just," Mr. Reynolds continued. "Furthermore, it seems you've been ignoring certain violations, including your own." Karen turned beet red. "And," he added, flipping to another page, "we have footage of you attempting to enter a homeowner's private farm under the false pretense of an inspection." The entire room turned to look at Karen. Silence. Then Tom, my awesome neighbor, leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Man, this is better than cable." I nearly lost it. Karen tried to defend herself, but it was too late. She had spent years bullying the neighborhood, and now that people finally saw her for what she was, the house of cards collapsed. Within minutes, the board had reached a decision. Karen was formally removed as HOA president. Karen's bitter defeat. After her humiliating downfall, Karen avoided me for days. She tried to act like it was no big deal, telling neighbors that she had voluntarily stepped down to focus on more important matters. No one believed her. The best part? Her own violations had finally caught up with her. Since I had reported them all, she was forced to repaint her front door, replace her mailbox, and dig up her entire flower bed. The cherry on top? A $300 fine for all the violations. Karen was livid, but there was nothing she could do about it. Victory never tasted so sweet. With Karen out of power, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The HOA stopped enforcing nonsense rules, and for the first time in years, people felt free to decorate their homes, park in their driveways, and generally exist without fear of citations. As for my farm, well, one afternoon, I put up a new sign at the front gate. Private property, not in HOA jurisdiction. Trespassers will be fed to the chickens. I had never seen Karen glare so hard in my life. The best part? The whole neighborhood threw a barbecue at my farm to celebrate the end of her reign. Karen watched from her porch, bitterly sipping a glass of wine. Tom leaned over and whispered, "Think she's mad?" I grinned, raising my drink. "Oh, absolutely." The fallout from Karen's downfall spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Everyone had an opinion, and almost nobody was keeping it to themselves. Some whispered about the great HOA reckoning. Others flat out rejoiced. And of course, there were a few who still clung to the belief that Karen had been some kind of suburban savior. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was clear. The neighborhood had changed. The first sign of this was the decorations. Practically overnight, homes that had once been shackled by Karen's absurd aesthetic rules burst into color. Halloween decorations appeared months early. Christmas lights twinkled in July. Someone even put up a massive inflatable T-Rex in their front yard. Karen hated it. She couldn't do a thing about it, but that didn't stop her from patrolling the streets like a retired dictator, arms crossed, mumbling about neighborhood integrity. One morning, as I sipped coffee on my porch, Tom, my neighbor and newfound co-conspirator, strolled up, grinning. "Did you see Jenkins' place?" he asked, nudging his head toward the house down the street. I glanced over and nearly choked on my coffee. Jenkins had gone full rebellion. His entire front yard was covered in pink plastic flamingos. At least 50 of them. It looked like a flamingo invasion. I let out a low whistle. "Man's got guts." Tom chuckled. Karen nearly imploded when she saw it this morning. Stood there for 10 minutes, just shaking her head. Jenkins himself stepped onto his porch at that moment, holding a cup of tea like a proud war general. He lifted it toward us in a silent toast. Tom and I nodded back, solemn. The rebellion was alive and well. Not everyone was celebrating, though. A small pro-Karen faction had formed, mostly made up of her remaining HOA loyalists. They were easy to spot. Same pursed lips, same exaggerated sighs, same hushed complaints about how far the neighborhood had fallen. One of them, a woman named Linda, even tried to gather signatures to reinstate Karen as HOA president. She went door to door, clipboard in hand, knocking like some kind of suburban missionary. When she reached my farm, I met her at the gate. "Hello," she said, clutching her clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "We're hoping to restore order to our beloved community. Would you be interested in signing?" "Nope," she blinked. "You don't even want to hear what it's about?" I gestured toward my farm. "Linda, my barn has more leadership skills than Karen." She gasped. "That's incredibly rude." I shrugged. "So is trespassing, but that never stopped her." Linda huffed and stormed off. I later heard she only managed to collect 3 signatures. One of them was her own. The rebellion was winning. The biggest turning point came at the next HOA meeting. With Karen out, the board had started operating like an actual group of reasonable people. No more stupid rules, no more citations over nonsense. People were even allowed to park their trucks in their driveways again. Karen, of course, still attended the meetings, as a regular resident. And she was miserable. She sat at the edge of the room, arms crossed, waiting for a moment to insert herself into the discussion. That moment came when the new president, Mr. Reynolds, suggested lowering HOA fees. "I oppose this motion," Karen snapped, standing up like she was still in charge. "If anything, we should be increasing HOA fees to maintain property values." The room groaned collectively. Tom leaned over and muttered, "Read the room, lady." Mr. Reynolds sighed. "Karen, you are no longer HOA president. You don't get to unilaterally decide anything." Karen fumed. "But you're all making a huge mistake. Look at this community. It's falling apart. Lawn ornaments everywhere. Inflatable decorations in broad daylight. It's complete chaos." Jenkins raised a hand. "I think it's awesome." Someone else chimed in. "We actually like having some personality in the neighborhood." Karen's face twisted in horror. But that's not what this community is supposed to be." Mr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. "Karen, with all due respect, that's not your call anymore." And just like that, Karen officially lost whatever grip she had left. She sat back down, defeated, as the board voted unanimously to lower fees and repeal half of her ridiculous rules. It was glorious. With Karen's power officially gone, people got bolder. A few weeks later, a mysterious new decoration appeared on the community bulletin board. A framed photo of Karen, right next to a list titled, "Fallen HOA Leaders, Never Forget." Nobody ever confessed to putting it up. But I had my suspicions. Tom swore it wasn't him, but the way he smirked every time he passed it told me otherwise. Karen tried multiple times to have it removed, but every time she took it down, someone put up a new one. Eventually, she gave up. Even though Karen had been dethroned, she still tried one last desperate move. One afternoon, as I was tending to my farm, she marched up to the gate and demanded a truce. I raised an eyebrow. "A truce?" She crossed her arms. "You've proven your point. But I think we can both agree that we've escalated things unnecessarily." I smirked. "We escalated?" She ignored that. "The point is, I'm willing to be civil. If you agree to stop antagonizing me, I'll stop filing complaints about your farm." I chuckled. "Karen, you were the only one filing complaints. And since you're no longer in charge, they don't mean anything." Her nostrils flared. "So you're refusing to be civil?" "I'm refusing to pretend like you weren't a nightmare for this entire neighborhood." She let out a frustrated sigh. I tried to bring order to this community. I gestured toward my peaceful farm. And look how terrible things turned out without you. Her eye twitched. Fine, she snapped. Enjoy your little circus of a farm. But just know, you're not as funny as you think you are. I grinned. Oh, I know I am. She muttered something under her breath and stormed off. Tom, who had been eavesdropping from his porch, called out, Love the mutual respect you two have. I waved at Karen as she disappeared down the street. She flipped me off without looking back. Tom burst out laughing. Over time, things settled into a new normal. The neighborhood was happier, freer, and more relaxed. People weren't afraid to decorate their homes, enjoy their driveways, or, heaven forbid, leave a single leaf on their property. Karen, on the other hand, kept to herself. She still lurked, still sighed dramatically whenever she saw my farm, but she had no power anymore. And that was enough. Life was peaceful again. And honestly, it had never been better. Karen was not the type to go down quietly. Sure, she had been stripped of her HOA presidency. Sure, the neighborhood had turned against her. And sure, her own violations had come back to haunt her. But did that mean she would accept defeat? Of course not. Instead, she doubled down. The problem was, without her official HOA title, she didn't have much power anymore. But that didn't stop her from trying to claw her way back into relevance. And what was her new strategy? Pure, unhinged chaos. It started with anonymous complaints. At first, they were subtle. I'd wake up to find an unsigned letter stuffed in my mailbox. Your animals are still disturbing the peace. Consider relocating them. Or, your fence is looking particularly unkempt. Perhaps you should make an effort to uphold community standards? The handwriting was practically screaming Karen. I decided to ignore it. If she wanted to waste her time sending anonymous letters like some passive-aggressive pen pal, that was her problem. But then the complaints escalated. One day, I got a call from animal control. Apparently, they had received a report that my farm was violating zoning laws. When the officer arrived, I met him at the gate. Hey there. What's going on? The officer, a tired-looking guy who had clearly dealt with way too many nonsense calls, sighed. We got an anonymous complaint about your livestock. Something about improper zoning. I smirked. Let me guess. The complaint came from a woman with short blonde hair, a clipboard, and a superiority complex. His lips twitched. I can't say for sure, but you wouldn't be the first to mention that. I handed him my official zoning permit. He barely glanced at it before nodding. Looks good to me. Sorry to waste your time. No problem, I said. But if you ever want to find the complainer for filing false reports, I fully support that. He chuckled. I'll keep that in mind. Karen was clearly grasping at straws, and I should have known she wouldn't stop there. A few days later, the police showed up. I was inside fixing a busted pipe when I heard a knock at my front door. Opening it, I found 2 officers standing there, looking a little too serious for comfort. Is there a problem? I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. We received a report of illegal activity happening on this property, one of them said. I blinked. Illegal activity? He pulled out his notepad. Specifically, a complaint about unauthorized construction and unlicensed business operations. I stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. The officer looked confused. Sorry, I said between chuckles, but this wouldn't happen to be another anonymous complaint, would it? The second officer, who had been quiet up until now, gave a knowing sigh. Let me guess. Karen? Oh, it was definitely Karen. They both visibly deflated. Turns out, Karen had been filing bogus reports all over town. Don't worry, the first officer said. This happens more often than you'd think. We'll log it as a false complaint. Mind if I ask what happens to people who abuse 911 like this? I asked. The officer smirked. If it keeps up, she could face legal consequences. Oh, that's interesting, I said, making a mental note to let the whole neighborhood know. Karen had gone nuclear, but she didn't realize she was blowing herself up in the process. The final straw came when she decided to take matters into her own hands. Since the complaints weren't working, and the authorities were starting to ignore her, she did what any completely unhinged person would do. She trespassed. Again. But this time, I caught her on camera. It was 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with an alert. My motion sensor cameras had detected movement near my barn. I groggily rolled over, opened the security app, and nearly dropped my phone. There she was. Karen. On my property. In the middle of the night. She was snooping around my barn, holding a flashlight like some kind of deranged detective. I sat up straight. Oh, this was it. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped outside, flipping on my floodlights. Karen froze like a raccoon caught in the garbage. I crossed my arms. Karen, what the hell are you doing? She stammered. I was just, I held up my phone. You do realize this is all being recorded, right? Her face went pale. You have cameras? Of course I do, I said, smirking. I had a feeling someone unhinged might try to trespass. Guess I was right. She tried to compose herself. I was just checking for violations. You can't prove anything. I turned the phone screen toward her. The footage showed everything. She gulped. You do realize this is a crime, right? I said. Her eyes darted around. No, it's not. I'm just on private property, without permission, in the middle of the night. She froze. I tilted my head. Should I call the police, or would you like to explain to them in person? Karen did the fastest walk of shame I'd ever seen. She practically sprinted back to her house, slamming her door behind her. I smiled, knowing she had officially lost. The next morning, I sent the footage to the HOA board, the neighborhood group chat, and, just for fun, to the local authorities. By noon, everyone had seen it. And the response? Glorious. Neighbors roasted Karen in the group chat. She's finally lost it. Imagine getting caught trespassing on camera and still trying to act like the victim. Does she think she's Batman or something? The HOA board, already sick of her antics, decided to ban her from all future meetings. And the police? Well, they paid Karen a little visit. I don't know what was said, but after that, she stopped filing complaints altogether. She went from being the terror of the neighborhood to a complete recluse. No more patrols. No more violations. No more HOA tyranny. Karen was finished. The best part? A few weeks later, I heard a rumor that she was moving. Apparently, her reputation was so ruined that she couldn't stand living in the neighborhood anymore. The day she packed up, Tom and I stood on the porch, watching with coffee in hand. Think she'll try to pull this crap in her next neighborhood? Tom mused. Oh, absolutely, I said. But I feel bad for the next guy. Karen glared at us one last time before driving away. Tom lifted his coffee in a toast. And the Wicked Witch is gone. I chuckled. Good riddance. As her car disappeared down the road, a peaceful silence settled over the neighborhood. No more violations. No more threats. No more HOA madness. For the first time in years, it truly felt like home again. And just for fun, I went to my farm gate and hung up one last sign. Private property. HOA Karen's not welcome. I took a step back, admiring my work. Tom grinned. Think that'll keep them away? I smirked. No, but it'll piss them off. And really? That was good enough for me. The neighborhood felt different after Karen left. Lighter. Like a storm had finally passed. For the first time in years, people could breathe. No more ridiculous citations. No more passive-aggressive letters. No more lurking HOA overlords waiting to pounce on the smallest infraction. The best part? The entire community celebrated her departure. The great Karen is gone party. It started as a joke. Tom, always one for a bit of mischief, casually suggested in the neighborhood group chat. So, how about we throw a little goodbye Karen get-together? At first, people laughed. Then they agreed. Before I knew it, plans were in motion for what was officially dubbed Community Appreciation Barbecue. Totally not a celebration of Karen leaving. Yeah, nobody was fooled. By the time Saturday rolled around, my farm was packed with neighbors, even people who had never spoken to me before. Jenkins brought his famous smoked ribs. Someone else set up a bounce house for the kids. People mingled, laughed, and for the first time in forever, just enjoyed their own neighborhood. And the best part? Karen wasn't there to stop it. Tom raised a beer and a toast. To a Karen-free neighborhood. A cheer erupted. The best moment, though? Right before the party started, someone taped a handwritten note to the community bulletin board. In loving memory of the HOA dictatorship, 2018 to 2025. May it never return. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my drink. Karen's last attempt at control, and ultimate humiliation. A few days after the party, I found out something even better. Apparently, Karen tried to fight back one last time, but failed spectacularly. Despite being banned from HOA meetings, she emailed the board, demanding that they reinstate the strictest rules she had put in place. Mr. Reynolds, the new HOA president, responded with brutal efficiency. He sent out a public HOA email with a very short message. Dear homeowners, We appreciate all community feedback. However, we believe that enforcing fair and reasonable regulations is in the best interest of our residents. That said, we will not be reinstating previous policies that have caused unnecessary distress to our members. The HOA exists to maintain a positive community, not to control homeowners. Best. HOA Board. Translation. Go away, Karen. It was glorious. Karen had lost every ounce of power she once had, and now even the HOA, her former kingdom, had completely shut her out. The final Karen sighting. For weeks, Karen was nowhere to be seen. Most people assumed she had gone into hiding, too embarrassed to show her face after being thoroughly publicly roasted. But one day, Tom knocked on my door, grinning like an idiot. "You're not going to believe this," he said, pulling out his phone. He had taken a picture from his car of Karen's house. Or rather, Karen's for sale sign. I almost dropped my coffee. "You're kidding." "Nope. She's moving." I stared at the picture, letting it sink in. This woman had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood. She had gone to war over grass height, mailboxes, and decorative garden gnomes. She had trespassed, lied, and tried to weaponize the HOA against everyone. And now? She had lost so badly that she couldn't even stand to live here anymore. Poetic justice. Karma at its absolute finest. She lasted longer than I thought, I admitted. Tom chuckled. "Yeah, but she's leaving in disgrace." We watched as a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. Karen stepped out briefly, barking orders at the movers, but she looked different. The once power-hungry HOA queen had been reduced to a bitter, defeated husk of herself. No clipboard. No smug expression. Just a woman who had fought tooth and nail for control and lost everything. I won't lie, I enjoyed every second of it. A Karen-free future. By the end of the month, Karen was gone. Her house was sold. The final remnants of her reign of terror had been erased. And the neighborhood? Thrived. The HOA, now run by reasonable people, functioned the way it was supposed to, as a community support system, not a dictatorship. People decorated their homes however they wanted. Kids played in their driveways without fear of being fined for excessive noise. My farm remained untouched, unbothered, and completely outside HOA control. For the first time in years, everything felt right. And as a final act of pettiness, I made one last addition to my farm's entrance. Private property. HOA Karens will be fed to the chickens. Tom took one look at the sign and burst out laughing. "Think it'll keep future Karens away?" I smirked. "Doubt it, but it'll definitely piss them off." And honestly, that was good enough for me. Final thoughts. They say what goes around comes around. And in Karen's case, she spent years terrorizing an entire community. She lied, manipulated, and controlled people just to feed her own ego. But in the end, she lost everything. She made life miserable for everyone, only to end up running away in shame. And as I stood there, watching the neighborhood finally enjoy the freedom it deserved, I realized something. Karma is real, and it's absolutely hilarious. A few weeks after Karen's departure, the neighborhood had fully transformed. Without her constant meddling, things had settled into a comfortable, almost utopian rhythm. People were happier, friendlier. It was like we had all been unknowingly trapped in a Karen-induced dictatorship, and now that the chains were broken, we were finally free. And honestly, it was beautiful. The neighborhood renaissance. With Karen gone, people stopped living in fear of citations. Overnight, driveways were filled with previously forbidden vehicles. Boats, motorcycles, and one guy even had an RV parked right out front. Nobody cared. Holiday decorations? Completely out of control. Jenkins, the same guy who had put up the Flamingo Army, decided to up his game by installing a permanent inflatable Bigfoot on his lawn. "Neighborhood mascot," he said proudly, tipping his beer toward me as we both admired it. And the best part? Nobody told him to take it down. We had won. Karen's replacement. For months, people had been worried that the next person to buy Karen's house might be just as bad. What if we ended up with Karen 2.0? What if the new owner was even worse? But then the day finally came. A U-Haul rolled up, and a young couple stepped out. No clipboard. No power-hungry expressions. Just two normal people, smiling as they unloaded their boxes. A collective sigh of relief swept through the neighborhood. Later that evening, Tom and I decided to do the neighborly thing and introduce ourselves. We walked over, greeted the new couple, and made small talk. They seemed friendly, down to earth. And then the golden moment happened. Tom, ever the instigator, casually asked, "So, Do you guys have any strong opinions about HOAs? The husband chuckled. Honestly? Hate them. We made sure this place didn't have one before we bought it. I nearly cried tears of joy. The curse of Karen's house had been lifted. The new owners had no interest in policing their neighbors. No plans to run for HOA president. No obsession with property values. For the first time in years, Karen's house was finally in good hands. The farm stands strong. As for my farm, not a single thing changed. The HOA never dared to challenge me again. Karen had tried her hardest to bring it under her control, and in doing so, she had proven something important. I was untouchable. The new HOA leadership had learned their lesson. Nobody wanted to start another war, especially when they knew how badly it ended for Karen. Instead, they let me be. I kept my animals. My barn stayed rustic. Cluck Norris, my bow-tie-wearing rooster, continued his reign. Life was exactly as it should be, and nobody tried to mess with it. A final act of petty revenge. Even though Karen had been gone for months, her legacy of absurdity still lingered in our memories. So one day, as I was making a supply run in town, I had an idea. A glorious, petty idea. I walked into a custom sign shop and had a plaque made. 2 days later, I installed it at the neighborhood entrance. It read, "Welcome to our community. A beautiful place to live. Now 100% Karen-free." It was subtle, but effective. And when Tom saw it, he almost fell over laughing. "Dude," he gasped between breaths. "That's evil." I grinned. It's accurate. No one ever took it down. The moral of the story. In the end, Karen got what she deserved. She spent years terrorizing the neighborhood, making life miserable for everyone, all because she wanted control. And what did it get her? Absolutely nothing. She was exposed, humiliated, run out of her own kingdom. She wanted power, but she ended up losing everything. And me? I went back to minding my own business, just like I had always wanted. No more violations. No more complaints. No more HOA nonsense. Just peace, quiet, and a farm full of well-dressed poultry. And that was a happy ending. Final thought. They say karma works in mysterious ways. But honestly, sometimes it just needs a little push. And if that push happens to come in the form of a petty farm owner and a well-timed security camera, even better. Have you ever had a nightmare HOA experience? What happened? What's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever heard of? If you had to deal with a Karen like this, how would you handle it? Would you ever live in an HOA neighborhood, or is it a hard pass for you? If you enjoyed watching Karen's downfall as much as I did living it, hit that like button. Rooster subscribe for more HOA chaos, neighbor horror stories, and a front row seat to the madness. Speech balloon drop a comment with your own HOA nightmares, or just say RIP Karen's reign in the chat. Rocket new videos coming soon. Don't let Cluck Norris down. Chicken.